And step into the secret fire. Yielder of the flame of our Lord. Dark fire will never veil you. Flame unknown. Go back to the shadow. You shall not pass!
Exciting start to our Taste of Torah today. I will add, because Bob is rightly concerned about these things, that I should state I have absolutely no permission from New Line Cinema to show you that clip. However, I would argue, if I'm hauled into court, that I'm not trying to profit from it. I'm simply using it as an educational illustration, and I think fair use would allow me to do that. But I understand I'm using copyrighted materials, so I am aware of that. So, wizards, balrogs, confrontations. That's part of our Torah portion, only you have to replace the balrog with the donkey, and we'll get to it. All right. So our Torah portion this week is Parshat Balak. And the name Balak comes from Balak, the son of Beor, who is the king of Moab. And in our Torah portion this week, we have an episodic report about the wanderings of the Israelites during their 40-year sojourn in the desert. And this one is, as always, quite honestly, wandering for 40 years, living in certain locations, oases, wadis for years on end. Pretty boring stuff. But of course, conflict leads to drama, drama leads to good storytelling, and so this particular episode has all of those features. So what's going on? Balak, the king of Moab, is worried because this mass of Israelites, I don't know we can call them refugees anymore, these wanderers, these semi-nomads making their way around, are passing through his territory. He doesn't like this, even back then, immigration control was an issue. So he doesn't decide to build a wall. Instead, he decides that in addition to going to war, he wants to use a traditional tool of ancient warfare, a curse, to whether it's to demoralize or actually activate some kind of forces against the Israelites. He reaches out to a guy named Balaam. Balaam, we learn, Bilam in English, Balaam, we learn, is a wizard, a prophet, not completely clear. But in any case, the king is sure that whoever he curses will be cursed, whoever he blesses will be blessed. So he's a guy of power and influence. And indeed, in our story, he talks to God. So Jewish tradition has generally gone beyond the mere wizard characterization and said that Bilam is a kind of Gentile prophet. So Balak sends delegation to talk to him, offers him a vast fortune to come and curse Israel. And Bilam, taking his cue from God, says, no, these people are not meant to be cursed, so I'm not going to try this. Well, the king is not to be discouraged, so he comes back and he offers even more and even more. And no doubt Bilam is heavily tempted. And then God says, go ahead. So strange. Why God's reversal? It's one of the many conundrums of this particular story, but this then sets into motion the moment that reflects the battle on the bridge of Karadurim, sort of. So Bilam, as people did in the ancient world, generally used donkeys as transport. So he's sitting on his donkey, he's on his way, and lo and behold, an angel appears in the path of Bilam and his donkey. It's not that the angel says you shall not pass, but clearly there's a problem. Interestingly, it's the donkey who detects the angel. Bilam does not notice it. And so when the donkey balks at going forward, Bilam harangues his animal, he beats his animal, he treats his animal very badly, even though the donkey refuses to go forward. And then, in yet another remarkable turn, according to the Torah, God gives the donkey the capacity to talk. And the donkey explains to the wizard, the prophet, what's going on. Hey, don't you see that? And again, irony, the prophet cannot see the angel that the donkey sees. And therefore, he is ignorant as compared to, or to put it in modern terms, who's the greater ass here, right? So anyway, once revealed, he does see the angel, but the angel, once again, like God, relents and lets him go forward. So in the end, Bilam makes his way to the potential battle site, and the king takes him to a hill nearby where the Israelites are currently residing, and he says, "Curse them." And so, in the traditional way of an ancient ritual, there were altars set up and sacrifices were offered, and then Bilam attempted to offer his curse. And what happens is he becomes possessed by God. And instead of laying out some elaborate curse, may your teeth fall out and your nipples prolapse or whatever curse would really be dreadful for an Iron Age person, he instead recites this lovely poetry about the people Israel and how majestic they are and how magnificent their community is and how God has blessed them. And this happens 3 times, standard sort of comedic moment where he attempts this, and 3 times it doesn't work. The king keeps moving him to different locations as if that's going to solve the problem, but it doesn't. And so in the end, Bilam speaks in a way that totally identifies with the people Israel rather than hates them. He says, "May I die the death of the upright. May my fate be like theirs." It becomes so potent that, in fact, we have arrogated or appropriated for ourselves this prophetic language from this Gentile prophet. When you come into the synagogue and we all gather on a Shabbat morning, we sing, Ma tohu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Classic biblical poem, but it's said by Balaam. He's looking down on the Israelite camp, and all he can say is, that is the most attractive camp I've ever seen. So that's just a sample of the kinds of things that Balaam says in his poem, which are all praises to us. The king, archly disappointed, but apparently reconciled to the fact that the gods, or God of Israel, whatever he thinks is the forces of divinity, will not allow this cursing to go on, and he sends Balaam home. Fascinating story. And in fact, the Talmud already recognizes something very striking, which is that this is a very self-contained story within the Torah, and that maybe the Talmud speculates, before it was incorporated into the Torah, this may have been a separate book. And in fact, the Talmud calls it the Book of Balaam, because it just is so strikingly different from anything else going on. I would go even further and say that it is a carefully crafted comedic story about prophets and prophecy, about a certain kind of skepticism about trusting in prophets, and the various reversals, whether it's the inability of the prophet to see what needs to be seen, or whether it's the fact that animals are more clever than he is. Even sometimes the reversals of God. God takes a stance, but then decides, I'm going to let this thing go forward and play itself out. And I'm going to demonstrate I'm in control, even when people try to ignore my will. So I think that the whole story is built around these reversals and this sense of ridiculousness. Now, remember, the donkey of Balaam is the only other animal that ever talks in the entire Torah, the other one being the serpent in Genesis. Now, in this particular case, it's interesting to note that it explicitly says that God grants the donkey the capacity to talk. So that sort of makes us look back at the story of the serpent in the story of Genesis. If it's God who grants that power there, it suggests, though it is never explicitly said, that God grants that power to the serpent in Genesis. And that opens up a whole can of worms, suggesting that maybe God wanted the drama of Adam and Eve leaving the garden and going on to build civilization, just as he wants Balaam to go forward and perform his deed. Even contrary actions, both these suggest, because of their associated animals, somehow fulfill God's will. God is sovereign, even when we're contradicting what God supposedly wants us to do. God plays a long game, as it were. But for us, I think the most useful thing to think about is the idea that we should be skeptical of charismatic and powerful religious leaders who do things primarily for money. Let's be honest, I am a professional rabbi. You guys pay me to do what I do. So I too profit from, well, not being a prophet, but being a rabbi. But of course, what I get is a salary, which we agree upon. You just take upon yourselves the responsibility to make sure that I and my family are housed and cared for, and that we have the basic resources we need to live the kind of lives that you live. Perhaps we need to be a little more cynical about those individuals who seem to make generating money for God a centerpiece of their ministry. Those individuals who seem to end up wearing Armani suits and flying jets and doing this sort of thing, they're using God as a spade to dig with, a gadget by which to enrich themselves. And Bilam is the model for that. So it, oddly enough, the Bible encouraged us to be skeptical of prophets. And it's not the only place. There are other places. Deuteronomy and the prophet Zechariah all offer cautionaries about powerful, influential, magnetic individuals who come and claim to speak in God's name. So if I can find an immediate contemporary association for this, it's to remind us to hold our religious leaders accountable and to make sure that they are doing what they do, because their primary values agree with ours, which is to advance God's cause in the world and to make communities better and not to be a curse upon them. So, as it turns out, I'm going on vacation next week. So, Parashat Pinchas, I don't have anything for you, and you'll just have to wait. But I'm sure you'll carry on very nicely without me. I, on the other hand, will miss you, and I look forward to returning after a week and recording new tastes of Torah. Take care, everyone, and Godspeed if you're going out to travel the world during the summer, as Robin and I are.